everybody. I'm Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. The aim of this podcast is to raise awareness about blindness, visual impairment, and disability in general, in a happy and light-hearted way. For those of you that don't know, I am blind. I was born with a condition called bilateral anophthalmia. Try spelling that one. It basically means that when I was born, my eyes didn't develop properly, so I wear prosthetics instead. The goal of this podcast is to remove some of the stigma and stereotypes around disabilities, whilst also having fun at the same time. Each week, I will be interviewing people from all walks of life, including some with hidden or physical disabilities like mine, and getting to know a little bit more about them and the lives they lead. In this episode, I am very excited to tell you that I will be talking to Liberal Democrat MP for Torbay, Steve Darling. My name is Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. Hi Steve, how are you?
Very good, thank you very much.
Great. Well, it's lovely to have you on the podcast. It's such an honour to meet you. But how's your day going so far?
I've had a fairly full day. I've visited 2 primary schools, which are really good, supporting those youngsters, some of them at Barton Hill Academy, who have taken on being in their leadership team for their school. And also then a conversation with a school about what it's like to be their local MP, which is really good. I've gone out, had a good chat with the people at the local job centre, hearing what their challenges are, what I could be taking up for them. And then also met with a group called Sanctuary Housing, which is our largest social rented housing provider, and just walked a little bit in each other's shoes to understand what our world's like and how we can try and improve things for local residents.
My gosh, sounds like you've had a very busy day then. And I'm picking up from that, a lot of variety in the things you do as well.
Yeah, it is, and being an MP to a certain extent, it's what you make it. It's just a matter of making sure that I'm being out there, available for local people, but also trying to get into things, understanding what the wicked issues and how we can drive positive change for the community that I know and love, that is Torbay.
Absolutely. Well, that sounds incredible. So to begin with, I know that you, like me, are visually impaired. So could you tell me a little bit about your visual impairment?
So I've got something called Stargardt's disease that is a form of macular degeneration. It's a form of juvenile macular degeneration. Macular degeneration is probably the most common form of blindness in the UK, full stop. It usually is age-related. And you get wet and dry versions of that. My Stargardt's version, when I was about 8, they thought I didn't know my alphabet, and that's why I was having difficulty understanding the charts. They then said perhaps this explains why he is getting up to read the whiteboard at the front of the room. And from then on, I went to a special school at the age of 8. I'm now 55. But I was registered blind from the age of 18. My eyesight has got progressively worse, but I still have a useful amount of vision. But with macular degeneration, it's easy to miss wheelie bins, little old ladies, and things like that. So hence I now have, in the last couple of years, a guide dog called Jennie.
Yes, absolutely. And we are definitely going to talk about Jennie a little bit later, because from the research I've done, it sounds like she's been pretty popular since you were elected earlier this year.
Yeah, she's just on the tube last night down at Westminster. There were 2 people who came up and said, "Hi Steve, is it the famous Jennie with you?" And then sitting down on the train at Paddington, somebody right next door to me was saying, "Oh, it's the famous Jennie and Steve." So it's yeah, she is the only golden retriever up in Parliament, and you hear whispers as you walk past with people saying, "It's Jennie, it's Jennie," and also just the other day, Westminster Hall, big space there, school group there up from Nottingham, and you could clearly the teacher clocked Jennie, able to name me, and then it was nice to be able to go and have a chat with the youngsters over there and thank them for coming and visiting the mother of all parliaments.
Oh, that's lovely. That's really brilliant. Do you think then, obviously, with Jennie being so sort of well known and popular, do you think that's helping to sort of promote like sort of positive interactions? People see Jennie and then obviously naturally want to talk to you because of it.
I think there's an element of that. I think it can get a little bit overwhelming. I've had to come up on the night sleeper on a Sunday because there's so many interviews, whether it's the Daily Express, uh, you know, press agency, Politics Home, or another magazine that I had to do. There's almost a queue, and at the Liberal Democrat conference, it was difficult going around because there were so many people wanting selfies with Jennie and myself occasionally. That it is, but I think there is that positive bridge because you will find in the chamber, because we rarely vote and it ends up being a bit of a kerfuffle in the chamber, that there is that opportunity of probably about a 10-minute gap between votes, and Jennie acts as a bridge to be able to have a conversation with people from the other side of the chamber, who wouldn't normally engage with you, and so that there is that positivity. But also, I think it's the fact that people on the televisions can see that there is somebody who clearly has a visual impairment who's a parliamentarian. And it's also really pleasing to know that there are other people in Parliament in this session with significant disabilities who are able to be there, to be seen to be there, but also to have that lived experience and apply that to what Parliament is about.
Yes, definitely. I mean, yeah, we might as well sort of dive into this topic now because we're already talking about it. But you mentioned about lots of interviews and things like that, and it's clear that Jennie has gained quite a lot of media attention, and I know that she even has her own X account. So what has that experience been like? I mean, has the attention that she's received surprised you in any way?
Yeah, I would say that it has. And the former MP Adrian Sanders for Torbay said to me, "Oh, you're going to be blown away." So it has been overwhelming at times. The Liberal Democrats have actually allocated Jennie her own press officer so that we can manage the number of press inquiries, because it has been into double figures. We've had the Wall Street Journal interested as well, doing a dogs versus cats bit, and it is phenomenal. But equally, it's a really good way of people getting to know you and clocking me. And it's like I was walking outside Parliament, and there were young champions for young people, and the person who was there supporting them clocked who I was because Jennie was with me, and when was able to say, actually, we're trying to get this over to a Liberal Democrat. Would you mind accepting this on behalf of us, Steve? And it was a manifesto for young people in the UK that they were promoting there. So that it does have real benefits. And Jennie's idea of fun is having a good sleep, so she can do that in the chamber, and also being loved by humans. So and there's lots of love there for her.
Well, it sounds like she's definitely living her best life. Um, but yeah, it's been, sort of absolutely, it seems to be absolutely amazing how much attention she's receiving. I mean, what was your experience like getting a guide dog?
I My wife has been on to me for many years that I should get a guide dog. So clear. I can't admit that it has been a really positive thing. So no, it has. It has been It's meant that perhaps as I'm walking along, I'm less cautious because I can put my trust in the dog. Also, there's an opportunity of just being able to engage with people a little bit easier because it can be more obvious that you're visually impaired if you've got a guide dog compared to a white stick. Sometimes people can just not clock the fact that you've got a white stick in your hand if you're visually impaired.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I suppose a guide dog is much easier to clock. You say that your wife's been on to you for many years about getting a guide dog. What made you kind of make that decision that maybe it was the right time to get one?
I think just years of browbeating, and I've been worn down over many years. She's on her fourth guide dog, so our household has had guide dogs in it for probably 25 years, and they've all been good. And I think it's just, you know, eventually you think, yeah, I'm going to grasp the nettle and go for it. And it's almost, I think it probably gets something about your inner self. Actually, do I, it's also a challenge for somebody who's visually impaired to use a white cane as well, because it's also admitting that you've got a challenge. So it's helped on that agenda as well, because whilst I've got some residual vision, and I can get around a bit, it's just so much safer having a guide dog compared to where I was previously.
Yeah, I can totally imagine. I know that I myself would really love to have a guide dog when I'm older. So it's super encouraging to hear from you that it's really helped you out. I mean, obviously with Jennie receiving so much media attention, do you think that's helping to, get rid of any misconceptions around having a guide dog?
I think what colleagues are telling me when I see fellow Liberal Democrats is that actually, because Jennie is quite popular, it's a good way of reaching out to people and having conversations around politics is one way that she's helping reach out people that otherwise wouldn't have been interested in politics. And then as far as the guide dog world, I've appeared on Breakfast Telly with Jennie around issues to do with discrimination and hotels, whether they're happy to have guide dogs or not, whether they suddenly decide to put up barriers when they realise that it's a guide dog rather than a pet dog. And it's useful being able to then hold the government to account around that and say, actually, is the Equalities Bill fit for purpose? It's been there for more than a decade now. Is it time to refresh it? Is it appropriate that people need to enforce the law themselves by taking people's like hotels, taxis, or restaurants to court? And shouldn't the state be more on people's side who may be being discriminated against?
Well, yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's really opened up the doors for some really interesting conversations then. So, talking a little bit about yourself then, could you tell me a little bit about what your childhood was like?
Yeah, so I was brought up in Torquay. I think probably when I got to about 8, they realised that I might have issues with my eyesight. Hence, I was getting up to read the whiteboard and things like that at school, and they realised that that was an issue. I then went to the West of England school up in Exeter for children with little or no sight, and I really enjoyed my world there of being able to do my O levels and CSEs as they were at that time. So yeah, it was a really positive childhood that I had, despite having a visual impairment.
It definitely sounds like it, yes. So you mentioned that you kind of, when they realized that there was something wrong with your sight, you then sort of transitioned to a school designed for children with little or no sight. I mean, do you remember, how was that transition for you? Can you remember anything about it and sort of the emotions you were feeling?
I can remember after the second term I was homesick because it was a school that you went to board, 24 miles away up in Exeter. So you could have been a day pupil, but I would say that once you got used to being away from home for periods of time, it was a really positive experience. And it's interesting. I visited a school this morning where they have a hearing unit, and that is currently under threat. They've been told that it may well be closed down. Now, what that means is that, and this is what I reflect with the youngsters this morning, having to go to Exeter meant that I didn't have that roots in my community, that those youngsters who may have hearing challenges go to that hearing unit. Well, they're embedded in their community. The other positive thing with having a unit like that in a mainstream school, it means that other youngsters, mainstream youngsters, are alive to issues that are to do with being deaf, and it is just another pupil rather than somebody who's very different to you. And so it's really positive that those type of units are out there, and it's something that I need to be chasing up with and seeing what can we be doing to make sure that that approach continues, rather than having that segregated approach that I know, it was a positive experience in one way for me, but negative in another.
Yes, absolutely. I can imagine that that was, yeah, I mean, sort of just not being, yeah, like you say, not being embedded in your community, being in a sort of very different part of the country. I can imagine that would have felt, quite strange. But was it nice to be able to kind of have most of your school life in a school that was, really accessible and specially designed so
Yeah,
you could
no,
have.
definitely. I would say that at the end of my school days, that I saw it as a really positive experience and would have described it as the best school in the country. So for me, as an individual, it's really positive on that, on the outcomes of going to school. However, I reflect that my two sons who've gone, to schools in the area that are within the community, um, you know, it's like one of them, he's got he will still be seeing friends from his primary school even though he's away at university. He'll be going and visiting them over the weekend, schools from primary school. Whereas if you go to a special school elsewhere, where you've got a big catchment of, let's say, the whole of the west of England, that's going to be a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, yeah, that makes real sense, and I can imagine that would be a massive challenge. Um, so you are a British Liberal Democrat politician and have served as a member of Parliament for Torbay in Devon since July of this year. So can you tell me a little bit about your role and what it entails?
Yeah, so it is. So I have previously been a councillor on Torbay Unitary Council for 30 years, and then I stood for Parliament for the first time. There was a Conservative majority of just under 18,000, and now I have a majority of 5,400. So I did think we had a good chance of winning. I didn't think that we would win that well. I've been through an election in '97, not dissimilar to this one, where there has been a massive change of who's running the country and the numbers of seats in, who's on which seats in Parliament. And that was in '97. And that year, we only won by 12 votes and we had to have 5 recounts that night. So I know what only just winning can be like because I was there at that time in '97. As far as what it's like for being an MP, I'm still finding my feet. It does feel like a massive roller coaster ride with more and more loops appearing in front of you. The real challenge is that you get elected and then you don't necessarily have everything around you to support your community. You don't have an office, you don't have a flat in London, you don't have staff. And at the same time, you've got literally thousands of emails coming in and letters that you're trying to support your community with. So we're beginning to get on top of that world, and it's recruiting the right people, which we are getting a very strong team together here in Torbay, but also getting the right team up in London, where I need people there to be able to assist me in holding the government to account. So I've got a young lady called Laura who started in the last few days. And I'm really looking forward to working with her up in Westminster, as I've got the Department of Work and Pensions brief as a front bench spokesman for the Liberal Democrats, and holding the government to account around that's going to be really interesting. In Torbay, we've got plenty of pensioners. We've also got, sadly, quite a few people who are on benefits for whatever reason. Holding the government to account around those areas, processing times, how are you doing enough around something called access to work that helps people get in work who may have a disability or other challenges for them to be able to work. There's always a massive underspend of that budget. How could the government do better on that, of actually getting people to have more productive lives who may have a disability? So whilst I don't want my disability to define me, there are some real opportunities for me to hold the government to account within that role as the spokesman for the Department of Work and Pensions for the Liberal Democrats.
Yes, it definitely sounds like it. But I think that's a really great point you just made there about not wanting your disability to define you, but also recognizing that it is a part of you and it can do some good as well. I think it's about finding that balance, isn't it, between not being known for your disability if you can help it, but also recognizing that it is there and there is good that comes out of it.
Yeah, and it is just, it is just making sure that it helps colour your judgment. And one of my favourite books is To Kill a Mockingbird, and Atticus in that talks about putting on another person's shoes and walking around in them. Well, actually, because of my disability, perhaps I can understand it. Perhaps other people's shoes are a little bit more comfortable for me to wear, and it is easier for me to advocate for those people because I may have faced not dissimilar challenges to them, and it's easier for me to understand and empathise their world without me having to project my views on them. It's easier for me to understand their world.
Yes, 100%. It's funny you talk about To Kill a Mockingbird, actually, because that is the book that we are currently studying in English for my GCSE this year. So, we're studying 3 books. Well, 2 plays, 1 book. To Kill a Mockingbird, and then Macbeth and An Inspector Calls. But we're currently reading To Kill a Mockingbird. And it is, I agree with you, it is a really good book. And I think it talks about some very important topics.
Yeah, it is. It is, well, one of my favourite books, without a doubt.
Yeah, I can absolutely see why. It is brilliant. I want to circle back to what you said about sort of when you were elected, how it was like a sort of roller coaster ride and how overwhelming it is. And I'll admit that's something I've never really thought about, how overwhelming it must be, but it makes total sense. I mean, have you ever felt that people thought it was kind of just like you're elected and everything's sorted? Do you think there's any sort of misconceptions around what that kind of process of being elected and the after effects of that is like?
I think it's also one of those things as well. You put yourself forward for it, so get on with it. It is part of what I'm sure a lot of the public would feel as well. But it is just trying to make sure that you're doing your level best for your community. As far as the roller coaster ride is concerned, it just does seem to have more and more loops on it. But it's beginning to steady down to as time goes on, you're getting more used to what's coming up. You're getting to understand how you can use different mechanisms in Parliament, and it's looking forward to engage with that, but also looking at some of the things that you're able to influence and thinking how, going out and having conversations, whether it's the DWP or the probation service, hearing what some of their challenges are and saying, how can I play this back to the minister? How can I convene? And that is one of the things that an MP can do, is compared to a leader of a unitary authority, a top tier local authority. When I was leader of the council, the budget was, you had well in excess of £100 million budget. I don't have no budget like that as an MP. However, you have the power to convene and to be able to draw people together and say, there is a wicked issue. Can we come together, try and sort this? Or you can champion different things as an MP. And it's beginning to find that and make that take form and drive that agenda forward, which is really important to me.
Yeah, I can definitely see why. So, that sort of day you got elected, that day you got the role that you now have. I mean, how did it feel to be elected? What emotions were you feeling at that point?
Well, I think the thing is that you daren't believe for weeks on end, it felt as if there was a really strong chance, and you just daren't believe it. And you will think about a few things beyond this, but you daren't think too much in case you're just setting yourself up to fail. And I would say, so you really got home early hours of Friday morning, and then it probably didn't truly sink in until Sunday morning. And then I still find myself walking down the long corridor of the House of Lords with the red carpet and wall-to-wall bookcases, thinking, am I really here? And that happened only this week. So there is an element of that. The bit that I'm surprised about is that sometimes you can suffer from imposter syndrome. And I did feel a little bit of that when I was leader of the local authority a couple of years ago. But I haven't felt imposter syndrome of being the MP for Torbay yet. And it's probably because previously I've worked for a former MP for Torbay for 18 years, helping people as a caseworker. So for a lot of MPs, it's a completely alien world to them that they've just come into, whereas it's something that I have a stronger than some understanding for a number of the new MPs. And so you don't have to quite process quite as much as another person.
Well, I mean, I would imagine that is very helpful that you have that understanding already. So, how did you become involved in politics, and what kind of sparked your interest?
Yeah, so I'm 55 now. I think I've probably been interested in politics since I've always been interested in current affairs. And I would say that probably when I was about 15, there was something called the miners' strike in the United Kingdom. And I think that really set me interested in politics, that actually, is it all about economics or is it about social justice and people? And clearly I came out on the side of social justice and people. Economics is important, but it was just a very divisive time in the United Kingdom, not dissimilar to Brexit, but it was something that made me think, actually, what is the point of the world? And really, ideally, one wants to get involved in politics because it can be a good way of changing the world if you're doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. It really sounds like, and I mean, obviously, getting involved in politics, you have the power to to make a real difference, which must be great. So, sort of speaking of making a difference, you know, Do you think that your own experiences and challenges, as someone with a visual impairment, have helped shape your approach to politics?
I would say that it's meant that hopefully I can have a greater understanding of people who've got their own challenges and may struggle to do certain things because it's one of those things where when you are visually impaired, you may have to do something a bit differently to the next person, but it doesn't mean that you can't do that thing. Um, so I think it just makes sure that you've got that approach.
Yeah, absolutely. I would imagine that. Yeah, I would imagine that would sort of help quite a lot. Now, I know that sort of during the 2024 UK general election, I know that one of the things that was sort of highlighted was the accessibility issues encountered by visually impaired voters. So, can you tell me a bit about this?
So I, to be honest, Evie, I'm not entirely aware of that as being an issue at the time. I'm aware that there were templates that some local authorities gave out to assist people completing ballot papers, and they should have had those at most polling stations. I'd also reflect that there used to be the previous general election, there was a scheme that the government ran called Access to Elected Office that supported people with a disability, and that, numbers of disabilities were covered by this, who wanted to stand for elected office. And that could help with distribution of literature if you had mobility issues. It could mean that you had somebody with you to be able to say, to help you whilst you were canvassing and knocking on doors. And that wasn't available this time. Fortunately, because I've been involved in politics for a good amount of time, I've got, to a certain extent, my own support network that there is around me. But for somebody starting out in politics, making sure that that access to elected office comes back is very important. And I will be, when I get time, putting questions to the minister around the access to elected office, because making sure that whether it's councils or parliament, that they have a greater reflection of society as a whole is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is really important because obviously, like you say, you have that support network. But for someone who's starting out, they'll be starting a completely new thing. They won't
Yeah.
know who to go to find that support network, and they may feel a little bit lost. So I think it would be great if they had that support.
Yeah, and the government should be, and it was a relatively, in the greater scheme of things, it was a relatively small fund of money that could make a lot of difference. And I just hope that before the next set of elections that are due to come up for local council elections, which are the county elections next May, that the government will give serious consideration to that. And to be honest, I can put so many questions a day in written questions, and I will, you just sparked an idea with me that's one that I need to get in sooner rather than later.
Well, yeah, I think it would be I'm glad I've helped to spark that idea. And I think it would be great. But yeah, I mean, sort of circling a little bit back to accessibility issues. I know that like you say, sort of for visually impaired voters, I know that sometimes actually being able to sort of read when it comes to submitting a ballot, reading the manifestos on that might be very difficult for someone who's visually impaired. If and also then ticking which person they'd like to vote for. You're just sort of ticking a box, aren't you? So I know that those were definitely highlighted, and then some visually impaired people having to have someone help them to do that, which obviously takes away that privacy. Those are the things that I definitely heard about
Yeah,
during the general election. So
yeah,
that's what I know. But I
yeah.
mean, is there anything that you think can be improved in terms of accessibility in that area?
I think it's always, rather than having to reinvent the wheel, I think it's always worthwhile looking at other countries. So I would say that's probably the starting point and seeing where's best practice elsewhere in the world that we could steal ideas and steal with pride is something I would encourage us to reflect on. I know that there were templates that were used and were available, so that should have been there. But also something that I would encourage people to do is think about getting a postal vote. That means that you can vote in the comfort of your own home. I don't think I've voted in a polling station for about 20 years because I find it easier to have a postal vote. I can do that, completing that on a CCTV at home, and therefore I'm doing it on my own terms rather than having to take time out on polling day to do that.
Oh, right, okay. See, I didn't know that that was, that's something I'd never heard of. I didn't know that that was a thing you could do, but no, that sounds great because obviously, like you say, you are doing it, in the comfort of your own home,
Yeah.
basically.
And I think the other thing is you then have about 10 days normally to vote. So you're not, tying yourself down to a single day. And it is, I think I wish they would do postal votes for everyone because there are some polling stations that are inaccessible. And I know in my patch, and I'm sure there are others that elsewhere in the country where they're not in the best of locations, and therefore, making sure that people, if they're challenged to get that postal vote, it's really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine that that would make things a lot easier for people and would make sure that as many people, as possible have a chance to vote, which would
Yeah.
obviously be great. Now, you've mentioned briefly that your wife is on her fourth guide dog now, so obviously she is also visually impaired, and you've also mentioned that you guys have two sons together. So what has your experience been like as visually impaired parents?
And I think that most people, with you both being visually impaired, would have moments of self doubt about are we really going to be able to pull this off with both of us being visually impaired. But I think they haven't turned out too badly. What one of them is a junior doctor in our local hospital at Torbay, and has just passed qualifications to become a registrar. So that's really heartening. And my other son, who's 21, he's reading economics and politics at Bath University, and he has a year's placement that started on the 1st of July at the Office for Budget Responsibility in central London. So that's worked out really well, that he started working about 10 minutes walk from Parliament. So I can regularly catch up with him when he's up in Westminster. And it's also having it also, useful having a friendly face up there in case you're a bit challenged as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it really sounds like they're both doing, really incredible things. Did you guys ever face any barriers or stereotypes, being visually impaired parents, or, was it generally okay?
I think it was mostly, and also I think it meant that our two sons were probably more aware of their world around them. So, as very small children, we'd be asking them to look for bus numbers, trying, reading, dealing with cash, reading shop fronts and things like that. So, I would suggest that actually it brought them on, whereas there were other youngsters who, at primary school, they weren't so used to having those responsibilities, and it helped their development, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose it got them really used to kind of seeing and interacting with people who have a disability and kind of just got them used to, yeah, just got them used to that. And it obviously meant that then when they saw other people who were visually impaired, they didn't really question it.
Yeah, there's an element of that, but it's also um, being confident out on the street. So, I know when we've taken other people's kids out with us, we found them almost a bit like herding cats because they'll be just all over the place and potentially putting themselves in danger because they just used to going from A to B in a car and just getting out in the car park and then going straight into wherever they're going rather than having to be appropriately managed down a pavement and things like that as a youngster. So it's just lots of stuff that actually we experienced.
Yeah, definitely. I would imagine that it really taught them a lot. So what would you say you hope to achieve while being a member of parliament?
I I would say that it is about championing the area that I've been elected for, which is easy to say. The three areas that the Liberal Democrats particularly fought the election on was sorting out our NHS and social care system. That is really important. There's the cost of living crisis and holding the government to account around that world is really important. And then the third one that we fought the general election on is in respect of sewage in our seas, which is an issue, sadly, in Torbay. So we do need to see significant improvement on all three of those fronts. And the other one that I know is a particular issue for Torquay and Paignton that I represent is we have less than half the national average of social rented housing in Torbay. So trying to make sure that the government change the environment for trying to build that is really important. And also having conversations with providers or just acting as a convener as the MP to try and get people interested and engaged in that world is really important because otherwise, often people's biggest cost in their lives is a home, whether you're renting or whether you're buying, and trying to drive that agenda in our area where we have a significantly higher than average number of people who are having to rent in the private sector that's really expensive is I know, a very wicked issue for us to tackle in Torbay.
Right, yeah. Well, they sound like some really great things you want to achieve, and I wish you the best of luck with them. I'm sure that you'll be able to achieve all of them. But what would you say has been your proudest moment so far?
I Thinking about this, I would say that it is probably the swearing in as an MP in the House of Commons, where you queue up and you swear an oath of allegiance, and you promise to be honest and so forth. And then you shake hands with the speaker. But of course, because I had Jennie with me, I think the speaker was definitely more interested in jumping out of his seat and giving Jennie a good stroke.
Oh, well, I mean, I can completely understand why that would be one of your proudest moments. And yeah, I think that that must have been a really incredible feeling for you.
Yeah, it was, and it is. It is just an absolute honour to be the MP for an area, and I'm looking forward over the next few years to pick up that baton and run with it, and championing the area, but also doing some good along the way for people with a disability, one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You're a really wonderful person, and you're doing well. You and Jennie, the team that you are doing some really incredible things. So thank you so much for
Nope,
coming on the podcast.
my pleasure.
It's been a real pleasure to meet you.
No, thank you for having me on, Evie, and keep up your good work with the podcasts.
Thank you very much. And thank you to my audience for listening, and I will see you all next time.